For this last section of Unit 2, I'm going to give you sort of a hodgepodge of information about 1700s colonial society. There's no essential question that we're answering. This is just some tidbits of info that you need to know about the colonies. So whenever we talk about the English colonies, it's important to remember that not all of the settlers were English. An overwhelming majority of them were, but there were other countries and nations that helped the English colonies become what they were. At the beginning of the 1700s, there were 300,000 people living in the English colonies. On the eve of the American Revolution, that has grown to 2.5 million in 1775. 20% of that population in 1775 were enslaved people from Africa. 90% of that population is located in the southern colonies. About 90% of the total population lived in rural areas and were farmers. Not a lot of cities are developed on the eve of the American Revolution. 6% of the population were Germans. That's quite a sizable amount whenever you are talking about the English colonies. Most of the German immigrants are going to be of the Protestant religion, specifically Lutheran, and many of them are settled in Pennsylvania. If you've heard the phrase the Pennsylvania Dutch, that's why. 7% of the population are Scotch-Irish. These are people who have immigrated from the northern part of Scotland and Ireland. They are very rebellious. They are going to be your frontiersmen, and they are going to be rabble-rousing on the eve of the American Revolution. And then 5% come from other European nations. We have French, Welsh, Dutch, Swedes, Jews, Irish, Swiss, so a whole diverse group here in the English colonies. So the southern colonies, this map is pretty interesting. It shows where the concentrations of agricultural products are. We have our little key over here, so we can see that in North Carolina we were growing corn. Naval stores refer to both tar and timber used to build naval ships, pigs, rice, and tobacco. So the only thing we're missing here in North Carolina is indigo, which was grown in Georgia and South Carolina. This is what I've hit on a little bit in class, the strict social structure in the southern colonies. Planters were those who came over already wealthy, and because of systems like the headright system, they were able to amass large amounts of land. So they are going to own plantations, which is accompanied with 20 or more enslaved people working on those plantations. So these families are going to dominate both social and political life, even though we can see on the triangle they make up the smallest part of the population. There are small farmers as well. They own their own land. To be categorized as a small farmer, there were 20 or less enslaved people working on those farms. Little chance of social mobility. If you are a small farmer, you are not going to become a planter. There's really no room to move up. They participated in government through voting, but are not going to be office holders. Poor farmers are going to be the largest segment of the free population in the South. They usually they own their own land as well, but they would not have held any slaves, and they would not participate in the government. And then we see at the bottom of the triangle the enslaved population in the South. 90% of enslaved people in the colonies did live in the South, working on the large agricultural plantations. The North Carolina regulator movement happened about 5 years before the American Revolution, and honestly, it was kind of like a little baby revolution movement in North Carolina. It was a rebellion by the backcountry North Carolinians. They would have been pretty poor farmers, and they believed that the government located on the coast at this point in New Bern were corrupt. They were charging excessive fees and taxes, and they are going to march on that royal government. We see here Governor Tryon is going to defeat the regulators. We see one of them being hanged there. So in this instance, the royal government did win, but it kind of sets the stage for a larger event throughout all of the colonies. New England Society. All right, we have our 4 New England colonies: New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Geography is going to play a huge role in the New England colonies because because the soil is poor and the growing season is short. We know that it's colder in the north. Winter lasts longer. They are not able to have large agricultural plantations. They do grow food for their own subsistence, but the primary industry in New England is going to be trade. Towns are going to be a central focus of daily life in New England. Most people, most men, did participate in town meetings. They were a part of the decision-making process, which did instill a sense of right to self-rule. So these people are going to be used to ruling themselves and having a say in their government. That's important whenever we roll around to the American Revolution and they are fighting against the crown way over in Great Britain. Puritan values were hard work, religious devotion, living a moral life, and focusing on education in order to be able to read the Bible. Public schools were established in the colonies, in the New England colonies, before America even gained its independence. All towns with 50 families had to have at least a primary school, and all towns with 100 families had to provide both primary and secondary school. So, because New England was not suited for agriculture, the ports on the coast are going to become hubs for trade with England. We see the rise of triangular trade, which involves the Americas, Europe, and Africa. We'll see on the next slide that we didn't always have to go in this neat little triangle, but primarily you're going to see sugar, tobacco, and cotton, raw goods, things like timber, going from the Americas to Europe. There they would manufacture those goods. They would turn sugar into rum, and they would send those finished goods down to Africa, where they would trade those things for slaves, which would then be carried to the Americas. So that was the basics of triangular trade, though there are other goods that are involved. So because trade is the basis of the economy in New England, merchants are going to have the most power and wealth within that society. merchants being the ones who organize and um, facilitate that trade. So here's some other pictures of the triangular trade. We can see that, sometimes it would go here and then come back here. It wouldn't always be the same ports in Europe. It shows you different types of goods that would have been part of this trade. And over here, it shows you what goods are being produced where. So a bit more about the middle colonies. This includes New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. These areas are going to have fine climates and soil for farming, so there will be agriculture there. Instead of the cash crops that you see in the South, like tobacco and indigo, the middle colonies are going to be known as the breadbasket. They're going to grow things like wheat and corn. But they're also going to have a good mixture of the merchant economy as well. New York is going to be one of the biggest ports for trade and also the colony's financial center. So religion in the colonies. So we know that New England was developed for religious freedom. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be tax-supported sorry, my brain hurts. There's going to be tax-supported churches within the colonies. There's not going to be a total separation of church and state within the colonies. Let's look at some pictures. Okay, so the Anglican Church. You're familiar with this. The Anglican Church is the Church of England. It is a Protestant group. It is going to be the official church in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and some parts of New York. So, did I say Maryland? Anyways, we can see that a large portion of the colonies bring the Anglican Church with them to the colonies. The Congregational Church is going to be the primary church in New England. It's going to grow from the Puritan and Pilgrims Church. It's established in all of the New England colonies except for Rhode Island. The Congregational Church was known for being independent, in that the people could directly communicate with God. The church didn't answer to a man like the Pope or an organization like the king. They were independent. All right, here's where it's really interesting. We see all of the colonies broken down. The Anglican Church dominates the South. Puritan Church dominates New England. And then we have 4 colonies with no official church: Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and Rhode Island. All of these different symbols show us pockets of concentration of other religions. So these would be other Protestant groups. Obviously, we see some Catholics, primarily in Maryland, and we also see some people of the Jewish faith spread throughout the colonies. So, the reason we're talking so much about religion is our last vocab term, the First Great Awakening. This was a religious revival within the colonies. It does begin in New England and New Jersey in the early 1700s, the 1720s and 30s to be exact. There are 3 main preachers that are associated with the First Great Awakening, and we are going to talk about 2 of them. Jonathan Edwards is known for his sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. As you can see, he believed in a religion of a angry, vengeful God. Hell was a terrible place. He was very vivid in his descriptions of hell, and that if you strayed away from God, you would burn for all eternity. So, a religious view that most of us are not familiar with, that is really rooted in the Old Testament and this idea of an angry God. He was so impactful because of the fear and emotion that he put into his sermons. And we can see here people falling at his feet, right? He's elevated, he's preaching in an open air. He's not standing at a pulpit inside of a church. He's attracting large groups of people. That's what the First Great Awakening was all about. George Whitefield was a minister from Great Britain. He came over to the colonies to talk about religion, helped inspire the religious revival of the First Great Awakening. He also held open air meetings. We can see here they are outside, can accommodate large groups of people. He had a different style of preaching that was similar to Jonathan Edwards as far as the emotion. He would shout, weep, tremble, really instill the fear of God within the colonist. So the effects of the First Great Awakening. An increase in church membership. Duh. A religious revival means that more people are believing in religion and going to church. But there's also a focus on the individual. You do not have to talk to a church leader or go through the Pope or anybody else to talk to God. You are responsible for your own salvation. You can talk to him directly. So this is challenging traditional authority that these colonists were used to. This is going to instill that sense of independence that leads to the American Revolution. Also, growth of new Protestant denominations like Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian. A lot of you probably fall under one of those branches because they are very common here in the South. Led to the creation of several colleges. Princeton, Brown, Rutgers, Dartmouth, some of our Ivies grew out of the First Great Awakening. We begin to see the enslaved population in the colonies convert to Christianity. And this was one of the first links that united all of the colonies. Even though it started in New England, it did spread throughout the 13. So they are going to be unified by this religious revival. So it's considered a long-term cause of the American Revolution. I'm done.